A warm nest, hugs, and food. That's all we really need. By That One Emo Witch. A Batman All Media Types fanfic, rated for teen and up audiences, with additional tags for rated T for swearing, tons of hugs, fluff, domestic fluff, size difference, but not in a weird way. It's more like Jason being big and cuddly and his siblings loving that. Tim Drake has issues. Established Roy Harper / Jason Todd. Good sibling Cassandra Cain. Good sibling Jason Todd. Good sibling Dick Grayson. They all have issues, and they all have trauma, but they're happy to forget about it for a while. Summary. Dick always told Jason he was like one big huggable teddy bear. Jason didn't know much about the teddy bear part, considering he shot out kneecaps on a daily basis, but he knew he was big. 6'3", built like a goddamn fridge, all muscle and skill. He could probably crush skulls if he tried. He couldn't figure out why Dick would see all of this and think cuddly. But Jason didn't entirely mind, and only pretended to, because how could a bat ever just say what they feel? But he liked it. Liked how he could somehow make his siblings feel safe. Even if each and every one of them knew the sheer violence he was capable of. They always came right to his doorstep whenever they needed comfort. Even Cass, deadliest of them all, silent as the grave, had a way of curling into him like he was made of something soft. So today, when his little birds started dropping into his kitchen one by one, all in need of warm food and hugs, he couldn't turn them away. He could never. Dick always told Jason he was like one big huggable teddy bear. Jason didn't know about the teddy bear part, considering he shot out kneecaps on the daily, but he knew he was big. 6'3", built like a goddamn fridge, all muscle and skill. He could probably crush skulls if he tried. He couldn't figure out why Dick would see all of this and think cuddly. But Jason didn't entirely mind. He only pretended to, because how could a bat ever just say what they feel? But he liked it. Liked how he could somehow make his siblings feel safe. Even if each and every one of them knew the sheer violence he was capable of, they always came right to his doorstep when they needed comfort. Even Cass, deadliest of them all, silent as the grave, had a way of curling into him like he was made of something soft. Tonight, it started with her. Jason unlocked the door to his apartment with the smooth, subconscious efficiency of someone who didn't need to look over his shoulder anymore, but did anyway. He stepped into the living room, dropped his duffel bag with a soft grunt, and froze. Cassandra Cain was sitting on the kitchen counter, legs swinging, boots not quite brushing the cabinet beneath her. Her head tilted slightly in acknowledgement, but she didn't say a word. There were no lights on, but the dim city glow leaking through the windows painted her in soft blues and shadows. Jason stared for a beat. Then, "You can't just break in at 2 a.m. Cass blinked at him slowly. "You said I can come whenever." Jason sighed, scrubbing a hand down his face. The "in case of emergencies" was implied. Cass didn't answer, just kept swinging her legs. Her hands braced lightly on either side of her. Silent, still, watching him. He let out a quiet breath, resigned. Cass wouldn't come here without reason. "Fine," he muttered, pushing the door shut behind him with a nudge of his boot. The system of 6 locks that he built all clicked back into place, one after the other. "Whatever. You hungry? I was thinking of putting on tea. But if you want something else... Cass didn't respond. Just reached out with one hand, palm up. Jason stilled. It was a small gesture, easy to miss, but he knew what it meant. That open palm wasn't asking for food. It was asking for him. His expression softened, tension bleeding out of his shoulders. As he crossed the room, slowly, unthreateningly, like she was a bird that might fly if he came too fast. He reached out and slid his fingers into hers, and let her pull him in. Cass slipped down the counter and into his arms in one smooth motion. She curled into him like she'd have been waiting for this all night. Jason held her tight, one arm around her back and the other hand resting gently at the base of her skull. She tucked her head beneath his chin, her breath warm through his shirt. She wasn't crying. Cass didn't cry much. But she clung to him with the kind of quiet desperation that said something inside of her hurt. He didn't ask what. Jason wasn't the best at reading people. Not like Dick or Steph. But he had learned to read Cass. She didn't speak with words unless she had to. Her real voice lived in the tilt of her head, the press of her fingers, the way her weight leaned into his chest like she was anchoring herself. And right now she was saying, I need this. I need you. So he gave it. He closed his eyes and pressed a kiss to her hair. Bad night? Cass nodded against him. Jason exhaled through his nose, steady. Want to talk about it? A pause, then a shake of the head. Okay. He didn't push. They stood like that for a long moment, long enough for the sounds of the city to settle again. A siren in the distance, the hum of a street lamp buzzing outside. The apartment was still, caught in the warm quiet that only existed when Gotham was asleep and not bleeding. Cass shifted slightly, not pulling away, just adjusting so her cheek rested over his heart. Jason tightened his grip. She was so small. Compact and lethal as hell, sure, but somehow still delicate. She always felt younger like this. Not because of her age, she was just barely 2 years younger than him, but because of the way she let herself be soft, for once, in a world that had taught her softness was weakness. He leaned against the edge of the counter, by the wall, to better support Cass in his arms. He grabbed a hoodie draped over one of the bar stools and draped it over her shoulders. Cass accepted it without a word, just tucked her feet under her and leaned in again. Jason let his head fall back against the wall. You know, he said after a beat, voice low and dry. Most people text before they break into their brother's apartment. Even just a warning shot. Hey, don't shoot me. It's just Cass. Something like that. Cass made a small noise. Maybe a laugh. Maybe just air moving through her nose. She still hadn't let go. Jason didn't mind. After a few minutes, he felt her fingers twitch, like she was trying to speak through them. Her body shifted against him again, and she tapped 3 fingers against his chest. He recognized the question in the motion. Are you okay? Jason shrugged one shoulder. Yeah, Star City was fine. Roy's great. So's Leanne. Love the kid. Ollie was being a bitch to Roy, so we decided that when him and I eventually get married, we're going to invite everyone except Ollie. So yeah, big win. Jason subconsciously grinned like a lovesick kid as he said this, at the implication that him and Roy tying the knot one day was destined. Cass tilted her head slightly, then let her lips quirk. She settled again, her weight heavy and warm. He thought about asking her why she came. What had driven her here in the middle of the night, silent and hollow-eyed. but he already knew she wasn't ready to say. Not yet. Cass didn't operate on normal timelines. She didn't even like talking. She was perfectly comfortable in silence. But Jason felt twitchy. He didn't know how to explain it. Cass must have sensed it too. Jason was just about to speak. Something easy, maybe even a joke to lighten the mood, when the sharp creak of the window sliding open sliced through the quiet. His instincts kicked in before he even thought, one arm tightening instinctively around Cass, settling her on the counter so she could easily break away if she needed to. The other reaching over the counter for the Glock he kept holstered in a makeshift compartment. Then a head of dark, mussed hair and far too confident blue eyes poked in. "Hi." Tim Drake said casually, like he hadn't just tripped every alarm in Jason's skull. Jason dropped the gun back into its compartment with a sigh that bordered on a growl. "You're lucky I didn't shoot you, replacement." Tim glanced at him, unfazed, then turned his attention to Cass. "I'd say I'm surprised to see you here, but Jay's cameras caught you sneaking in like an hour ago." Cass had been waiting here for an hour? Cass, still curled against Jason's side, didn't lift her head. She just muttered, dry as sandpaper, "Creepy." Jason made a noise of agreement, glaring hard at Tim. "Why the hell do you have access to my CCTVs? Tim shrugged and hoisted himself through the window, like it was routine habit, which, knowing him, it probably was. "You're using old Wayne Tech firmware. It took me like 2 minutes to bypass your firewalls. You should really update that." Jason groaned and ran his hand through his hair. "You know, there's a front door. Most people use it. It's got this new thing called a handle. Revolutionary." Tim ignored him completely and made a beeline for the fridge. "I haven't eaten since noon," he said. B's been on one of his no sleep, no food, just brood kicks, and Alfred's out of town. Timothy Jackson Drake Wayne willingly announced his need to eat. Jason was sure this meant he was masking some even bigger problem. Tim opened the fridge, paused, then made a disgusted face. "You don't have any heat and eat stuff? Just vegetables, raw meat, and like 5 different kinds of cheese? How do you even live?" Jason leaned back on the counter, arms crossed, eyebrows raised. "I cook." "Like, from scratch?" Tim looked personally offended. "That's barbaric." "Fucking rich kids." Cass let out a quiet sound, a breath that could have been laughter, and peeled herself away from Jason's chest. Her legs pulled onto the counter. She nudged him gently towards Tim, her expression unreadable, but purposeful. Jason glanced down at her, then over at Tim, who was still poking around like a disappointed raccoon. Yeah. She saw it. The tension in Tim's shoulders. The hollowness behind the sarcasm. Cass wasn't here by accident, and neither was Tim. Of course not. He sighed, taking his time to walk around the counter and to the fridge. "All right, Timberly. What do you want?" Tim pulled out a packet of lasagna noodles, some tomatoes, a block of mozzarella, and onions. "Make something with this. Impress me." Jason huffed, already moving to the cupboards. "You're lucky I'm feeling generous, and slightly emotionally responsible for your well-being." "I'm lucky you're a sucker for praise." "You think I want praise from you?" Jason scoffed, tossing a pack of bell peppers onto the counter. "You eat like a raccoon with an espresso addiction. You wouldn't know good food if it punched you." Tim leaned against the fridge, lips quirking upward. That sounds like something someone who is definitely trying to impress me would say. Cass wandered over to the couch and sat down, folding herself neatly into the corner cushions. Her eyes tracked Jason in the kitchen, then flicked towards Tim. She was still quiet, but her hands rested loosely in her lap, like she'd done her part, and now she could rest. It wasn't her turn anymore. Jason moved on autopilot, knife in one hand, chopping like a pro. The sizzle of garlic hitting oil filled the kitchen with warmth. He kept talking, partially to fill the space, partially to keep Tim anchored. "Lasagna's a labor of love, you know," he said. "You don't rush it." Tim made a show of checking the time. "So, ETA on dinner?" Jason didn't look up. 45 minutes, give or take. Tim lingered by the counter for another moment, watching Jason assemble the base of the sauce, like he might want to say something else. But then he just nodded once and drifted towards the couch. Cass was already waiting. She didn't say a word, just opened her arms and pulled him in like gravity. Tim didn't resist. He collapsed beside her, limbs loose and clumsy, like a marionette cut from its strings. Cass kissed the top of his head, her fingers curling protectively around him. Jason caught it all from the kitchen. He didn't comment, didn't smile, just kept working. He'd make enough for leftovers. And he decided not to add any meat. Damian wouldn't touch it if he did. And he had a feeling he was going to end up feeding half a dozen people tonight. Just a gut feeling. Right on cue, the doorbell rang, and Jason startled just a little. But only because no one ever rang his doorbell, or even bothered to use his door. He paused, glanced at the simmering pot on the stove, then walked towards the couch. Cass was gently stroking Tim's hair like he was a baby kitten, and Tim had gone completely limp. Probably half asleep. Jason didn't want to ruin the peace, but still. The bell rang again. "Be right back," he muttered towards the kitchen. He wiped his hands on a dish towel and padded over to the front door, already bracing for whoever might have shown up this time. Another one of his billion siblings, or maybe Bruce himself, with that tense little frown like he'd smelled feelings in the air. Couldn't be Batman. Only Bruce used doors. Jason unlocked the door, pulled it open, and stopped short. Duke Thomas stood on the other side, wearing his Robin jacket, half-zipped, goggles perched on the top of his locks, and a sheepish, tired smile on his face. In his hands, he held what appeared to be a mangled, sparking head of a street lamp. The metal casing was warped, and the glass was shattered. It looked like it had been ripped off the pole with brute force. "Okay," Jason said. That's not usually what people bring to dinner." Duke held it out like a peace offering. "I didn't know what to do with it." Jason blinked at him. Blinked at the hunk of twisted municipal property. "I don't even want to know what happened." Duke gave a weak shrug. "Some idiot with meta strength threw a dumpster at a bus stop. I caught it, but it crashed into a pole and, this came off. I didn't want to just leave it laying around. Someone could trip." Jason pinched the bridge of his nose. "You are the weirdest damn Boy Scout I've ever met." He took the broken street lamp and leaned it against the side wall of his apartment, like it was a particularly unfortunate coat rack. Then he pulled Duke inside with a casual arm slung around his shoulder. "I hope you like vegetarian lasagna," he said, closing the door behind them. "You have no choice but to eat it now that you're here." Duke grinned. I mean, that's not a threat. Your cooking's better than Alfred's, and honestly, I'm starving. As he stepped inside, his eyes landed on the couch. Cass looked up first and nodded at him. Tim half raised a hand from where he was nestled against her shoulder, eyes heavily lidded and face pale. The sight made Duke pause in the middle of toeing off his sneakers. "Huh," he said. "Didn't know you guys were here." Raiding Jay's kitchen and stealing his food, Tim mumbled in answer. Jason expected Duke to make a beeline for the couch. He was a hugger when the mood struck him. But instead, Duke took one look at the bundle of limbs already on the cushions and headed towards the kitchen. He pulled out one of the bar stools at the counter and sat down with a quiet sigh, like his bones were made of lead. Jason stirred the sauce again. "So, what's up?" Duke didn't answer at first. His eyes were fixed on the counter like he was trying to stare a hole through it. Then, like someone had twisted open a spigot, he started talking. "I'm patrolling during the day," he said, voice low but picking up momentum with each word. "Which is fine, it worked better with my powers, and it's summer, so I don't have school. But what happens when the fall semester starts again? I can't just skip class every time there's a mugging in Robinson Park, or some asshole tries to rob a bank at noon. Also, noon, in broad daylight. Who does that?" Jason nodded, not interrupting. "And I know Bruce says we should keep our lives balanced, but what the hell does that even mean when the school starts sending letters home because your attendance dropped below 70%? And I'm in 5 AP classes. If I flunk out, or miss enough assignments, my GPA is gonna suffer. And then I won't be able to go to college, and my parents will be so disappointed if I don't even get into college. I can't just tank everything because Gotham can't go 5 minutes without some idiot blowing up a Burger King to steal their paper crowns." Jason arched an eyebrow. Did that actually happen?" "Yes!" Duke flared his arms. "Yesterday, freaking Condiment King again." Jason gave a quiet, "Huh," and kept stirring the sauce. Duke wasn't done. Clearly hadn't even gotten to the good part. "And it's not even just the school thing," Duke went on, voice rising. "It's sleep. I'm tired all the time. I nap on rooftops now. That's a new low. You know it's bad when I start thinking of getting coffee. I don't even like coffee." "That's slander," Tim mumbled from the couch, eyes still mostly shut. "Coffee is love. Coffee is life." Duke didn't even look at him. "I'm serious, man. I'm burning out. But I feel like I can't stop, 'cause everyone else is doing it. You all have jobs, or college, or some kind of life, and you still show up for every big fight like it's nothing. Meanwhile, I'm stressing over how to finish a bio paper after chasing a guy with freeze grenades for 2 hours. Jason set the spoon down with a little clink. "Hey, no one said you had to keep up with us." "Yeah, but it's you guys," Duke said. "You've been at this since you were younger than me, and you all make it look easy." Tim's voice floated over, sleepier this time, but still clear. "It's not trust." Duke paused. "I got pneumonia in sophomore year," Tim said, still curled up against Cass. "Because I stayed up 5 nights in a row doing stakeouts and writing essays." Jason winced. "Shit." "I was hallucinating by the end," Tim added, eyes still closed. "I wrote an English paper on Moby Dick, but halfway through I started describing an actual killer whale I saw in the harbor. I got a C-. Pretty sure this was also when Bruce decided I needed ground rules and curfew or whatever." Cass made a faint sound. almost a laugh. Tim sighed. I probably should have taken a break, but I didn't want to fall behind. Didn't want Bruce to think I couldn't handle it. Jason glanced over his shoulders. He never would have thought that. Tim didn't answer. Duke leaned on the counter, elbows braced, fidgeting with the coaster. I don't even know what I'm supposed to say when people ask why I keep showing up to school with bruises and sleep deprivation. Like, what's the cover story? Got beat up at a protest? Fell down the stairs again? Football, Jason said. Huh? That's the excuse, Jason said, reaching for the ricotta. Join the football team. Stay on the bench so people don't pay you much mind. And all the bruises can be blamed on practice. Nobody questions that. Duke blinked. That's actually kind of genius. Think Dick, Jason said. He was the creator of that one. Back in the day, he had an entire fake gymnastics scholarship he used to explain why he never slept, and had 50 different injuries at once. I used photography internship, Tim offered. Jason glanced at him. Didn't they ask why a photography internship involved bullet wounds? Yeah, I told them I worked in villain attack zones. Not a total lie. Jesus, kid. Tim shrugged, eyes drifting closed again. Duke exhaled. You guys make it sound doable. It is, Jason said. Don't beat yourself up for feeling overwhelmed. Duke nodded slowly, letting the coaster fall from his hands. Thanks, he said, voice quieter now. I just needed to vent, I think. Jason shot him a small, crooked smile. That's what we're here for. We help. Cass added, softly, giving Duke a smile. Duke actually laughed. Jason turned back to the stove, laying the first noodles down on the baking tray. He layered the sauce with practiced ease, adding dollops of ricotta between strips of pasta, then sprinkling cheese on top. Cass hummed softly under her breath, still cradling Tim like she had claimed him as hers. Duke was quiet now, calmer, not slouched, not hunched, just there, the way a person was when they felt like they could be. Jason had just put the lasagna in the oven and set the timer when he heard a quiet thump coming from his fire escape, like someone had just landed there. This time, he didn't startle. He was beginning to expect little gremlins dropping into his house now. The thump on the fire escape came again, lighter than Duke's street lamp delivery, heavier than Tim's sneak in. Jason didn't flinch, just wiped his hands on a towel and mumbled, Jesus, who's next? Dick in a karaoke machine? A moment later, a purple-clad figure dropped down in front of the open kitchen window, crouched like a gargoyle. Spoiler. Her domino mask caught the light from the kitchen as she peered in, taking in the room with a sharp eye. Steph paused, surveying the scene like a detective evaluating a very weird crime scene. Duke perched on the kitchen counter, looking frazzled, Jason elbow-deep in vegetables, and Cass gently stroking a curled-up Tim like she was soothing a traumatized house cat. The smell of baking cheese filled the air. Steph raised an eyebrow. Bad timing? Jason exhaled a long breath through his nose, and without looking up from the salad bowl he started prepping, said, Nah, you're here now. I'm making enough for everyone who could possibly show up. Cool, she said, simply, bolting through the window and landing with practiced ease of someone who could break into any room she wanted. She tugged off her mask and hood, shaking out her blonde hair. It smells amazing. Cass looked up from the couch, Her gaze softened the second she saw Steph. They didn't say anything, not in the traditional way, but Cass leaned up, and Steph bent down to meet her halfway. A brief kiss. Duke groaned dramatically and clamped a hand over his eyes. PDA, we have minors present. Tim, without opening his eyes, muttered from the couch. You're the only minor here, genius. I'm still a minor. Duke shot back, still half covering his face. Jason smirked to himself as Steph pulled up a bar stool beside Duke and bumped her shoulder gently against his. How you hangin', kid? She asked, tone casual, but the question sat heavy with real concern beneath the levity. Duke rolled his eyes. Oh, you know, preparing to watch my GPA slowly implode while I spend every other afternoon punching muggers in the face and pretending I don't need therapy. Steph gave a low whistle. Ah, the full bad experience. Congratulations, you're officially one of us. Jason finally looked up from the cutting board. Speaking of that, he said, wiping a tomato-stained hand on a towel and pointing his knife at Steph. What brings you here? You're not exactly one of my feral children. Steph waggled her finger at him. Well, first off, rude. Thought we were buddies. Second off, I just bought a new batch of spray paint, and I was gonna ask you if you were free to tag Gotham Harbor with me. You know, maybe write "The Bat Sucks" on a shipping container for fun. Jason arched an eyebrow. Really? Steph gave him a wide, impish smile. Unless you're scared. Jason snorted. Please, I've tagged LexCorp's buildings in broad daylight. Cass smiled faintly at that. But Jason wasn't fooled. Steph didn't usually invite Jason, of all people, to hang out unless she needed to decompress with someone who knew what it was like to grow up in a not-so-fun part of Gotham. And he knew her well enough by now. Well, enough to recognize the subtle tense in her shoulders. The way she hadn't quite stopped fidgeting since she sat down. Well enough to remember how she had hated being coddled. Hated the idea of being pitied. So he didn't offer her sympathy. Just shifted his cutting board over and handed her a knife. Come help me chop some romaine. Caesar salad goes with lasagna, right? Steph blinked and took the knife with a grateful nod and moved beside him. Jason glanced over at Duke. You feeling up to doing something? Duke looked up from his phone. I used to make breadsticks with Mom. Jason smiled faintly. Then you're on breadstick duty. You know where everything is. You want help? Ask. Duke stood and started digging through the cabinets. Yes, chef. From the couch, Tim groaned. You never let me cook in your kitchen. That's 'cause last time you did, you almost burnt the eggs in a microwave. Steph gasped exaggeratedly. Timothy, you can't burn eggs in a microwave? You can if you're Tim. Tim made a pained noise and buried his face in Cass's shoulder. Cass patted his head rhythmically, not unlike someone calming a distressed pet. Jason grinned. I like my kitchen in one piece, Timberlina. Ballerina cappuccina, Duke muttered under his breath, but was pointedly ignored by everyone. You like being a tyrant, Tim shot back at Jason. And you like caffeine more than sleep. What's your point? I feel like this is just how he shows love, Duke muttered, cracking his knuckles as he measured out flour. Insults and carbs. You're not wrong, Steph added, tossing chopped lettuce into the bowl. Language of affection. Jason said, flicking a bit of garlic towards Tim with the tip of his knife. Look it up. Steph glanced sideways at him as she worked. Hey, real talk, Hood. You actually okay? Jason shrugged. I'm standing in a kitchen filled with depressed vigilantes who broke into my apartment one by one. But I'm not actively bleeding or emotionally spiraling, so yeah, solid B-. Yeah, Steph laughed. It wasn't loud, but it was real. They worked in silence for a bit. The kind that didn't need to be filled. Just the soft rhythm of chopping, the hiss of butter melting on the stove for Duke's breadsticks, the hum of the oven, and the occasional creak of Tim shifting on the couch. Eventually, Jason leaned a hip against the counter and gave Steph a side eye. You still want to hit the docks later? Steph shrugged, brushing hair out of her face. Maybe. Depends on how the night goes. Might just want to crash on your floor. Isn't gonna be much space for anyone if this pattern of babies spawning at my door keeps repeating. We're not babies, Duke protested. I'm almost 17. Steph patted his head, grinning. We'll all cuddle. Bet Dick would want to be here. Jason checked the counter on the oven and nodded to himself. All right, salad's ready. Breadsticks in the works. Lasagna's got maybe 20 minutes. If one more of you climbs through the window, I'm charging rent. Tim, still face down on the couch, raised a limp hand. You've already made that joke before. Last week. And the week before. Yeah, well, Jason said, rinsing his hands off at the sink. I'm recycling, like a responsible adult. Then, Tim suddenly gasped, stiffening against the cushions. Holy shit, why is he like this? Jason blinked and turned around, following Tim's gaze to the second window, still closed, unlike the one Tim and Steph had used. Outside, clinging upside down to the brick wall like a bat-themed Spider-Man, was Damian Wayne. His cape hung downward like a curtain in the wind, and his expression, upside down as it was, somehow still managed to radiate disdain. With precise, practiced movement, Damian reached down, pried the window open from the top, and dropped into the apartment with a perfect roll. He came up scowling, brushing imaginary dust off his tunic. Of course you're here, he snapped, eyes locking on Tim. Are you ever not napping uselessly in someone else's living room? Tim didn't even lift his head. Only on Tuesdays, he replied dryly. I reserve Mondays and Fridays for watching paint dry. Cass, completely unfazed by the tension, resumed stroking Tim's hair like nothing changed. Jason, meanwhile, rubbed his temples and sighed, then got back to cleaning the counter. Then Damian turned back towards the open window, leaned out again, bracing his weight with one arm. They all heard a low, excited woof, followed by some light scuffling. A moment later, Damian grunted and hauled something massive through the window. Titus, a full-grown Great Dane, padded into the room, with the self-assurance of a dog who believed he belonged in every room. His fur was sleek, his posture proud, and his tail whipped gently against Jason's cabinets. Jason blinked. Wait, hold on. You brought the dog? How did you even... Damian let the window shut behind him with a click. Where I go, Titus goes, he said matter-of-factly, as if this were a universally accepted rule. In your defense, Steph said, not looking up from the counter. He's the most emotionally well-adjusted person here. We need the balance. Debatable, Duke added, shaping the dough into breadstick ropes. We're doing fine. Jason just shook his head. Whatever, as long as he doesn't knock over my spice rack again. Tim made a noise of deep betrayal. Again? I didn't say you did it again. Though you did. I said Titus did it. Jason shot back. Titus would not do that, Damian said flatly, scratching behind the dog's ears. Unlike you, he is trustworthy. Jason crossed his arms. You didn't answer my question. What are you doing here? Damian sniffed. I thought I would get the chance to speak to you in private, Aki, he said, eyes flicking towards Jason with a too serious gaze only Damian could pull off. But these buffoons have infested your home. Across the room, Steph and Tim both flipped him off at the exact same time. Cass, ignoring the dramatics entirely, patted the spot next to her and Tim on the couch. She beckoned with a soft hand gesture. She clearly saw it even more loudly than Jason did, the way the kid was all tensed up, scowling more, overcompensating to cover nasty feelings. Damian frowned at her, then at the seat, then back at her again. I have no interest in your... Go on, Jason interrupted, already turning back to the oven to check on the breadsticks. I'm making lasagna. Vegetarian, don't worry. But you gotta let Cass hug you first. Damian made a small, strangled sound of protest, but he didn't actually say no. Instead, he huffed, muttered something under his breath in Arabic, and reluctantly crossed the room. Cass opened her arms as he approached, and without much more resistance, he sat down on the other side of her, letting her fold him into the same quiet embrace she kept wrapped around Tim. Titus followed on his heels, and immediately leaped onto the couch. He wedged himself between Damian and Tim, on Cass's lap, tongue lolling happily as he gave Tim's cheek a giant lick. Tim grimaced. Gross, I'm immunocompromised, you know? But his hands rose automatically, finding Titus's head and stroking between his ears. Titus whined contentedly and flopped against him, with the full weight of an armored cow. Cass, with one arm around each boy, and a dog squashed between them, gave a small, pleased hum. Jason leaned against the edge of the counter, watching the chaos settle into something soft. Not calm exactly, but peaceful in its own weird way. The lights were warm, the kitchen smelled like garlic and cheese, and his living room was overflowing with emotionally stunted vigilantes who had decided, inexplicably, that this was their safe place. And a dog. He smiled a little to himself. Only one person left, he muttered aloud. Steph looked up. You expecting Babs? Jason snorted. God, no. No, Babs wouldn't hang out with people if she felt sad. Duke glanced over. Wait, who are we missing then? Jason didn't answer right away. He was still watching them all. Tim, half asleep and still petting Titus. Cass with a look of serene contentment as she hugged both boys. Steph humming to herself while wiping tomato off her hands so she could use her phone. Duke turning the breadsticks halfway through their bake, like a pro. Even Damian, the most hostile 11-year-old in this hemisphere, had gone quiet. Jason leaned against the counter. Towel hung over one shoulder. Arms crossed. The oven gave a soft click as the heat cycled down. 1 minute and 30 seconds left on the timer. Cass cradled Tim and Damian like she was seeking comfort, while trying to give comfort. Tim, still mostly motionless except for the slow rise and fall of his chest, scratched absently behind Titus's ears, while Damian sat stiffly under Cass's arm, pretending he wasn't enjoying the quiet. Duke had his sleeves rolled up and was plating breadsticks on a tray, like this was a dinner party. Steph was texting with one hand and drinking a glass of water with the other. Her posture relaxed. The moment felt weirdly perfect. Jason felt okay. Really okay. Okay, I texted him, Steph said brightly, pocketing her phone. Bet he'll want to join the cuddle cult back there. Jason chuckled. Of course you did. Less than a minute passed before the inevitable thump-thump-clunk of heavy boots hitting the fire escape. Then the window slammed open, despite already being unlocked, and Dick Grayson vaulted inside with the grace and dramatic fare of a circus performer turned vigilante turned big brother. His hair was wind-tousled, and his jacket unzipped. And his smile, blinding. "Aw, look at you guys," he cooed, voice soft in a way that made Jason's chest tight. He paused, at the sight of everyone. The way Tim was curled against Titus, the way Cass was holding both boys, the casual rhythm of Steph in the kitchen, and Duke plating the last of the breadsticks, like a Food Network contestant. And Jason, of course, standing there in a grease-stained t-shirt with oven mitts on, glancing at him like he was expecting this the whole time. Dick's smile turned fond and warm. "Thanks for the invite, Steph." Steph gave a satisfied two-fingered salute. Then Dick turned to Jason. "And you didn't text me?" Jason just rolled his eyes. "I assumed you'd show up eventually." Dick sighed. "I guess I did." As if on cue, Titus barreled across the apartment to greet him, tail wagging like he was trying to helicopter off the ground. Dick laughed and crouched immediately, rubbing the massive dog behind the ears. "There's my favorite bat," Dick said, ruffling Titus's ears affectionately. Titus barked once, loudly, as if to agree. Then Dick moved towards the couch. He didn't open his eyes, but he tilted his head back, slightly to make room. Cass looked up as he approached, her expression peaceful. Dick leaned over and pressed a kiss to Tim's forehead. "Hey, baby bird." Tim grunted softly, a smile ghosting across his lips. Cass received the same treatment, Dick brushing a hand down her arm before pressing a gentle kiss to her temple. She leaned into it, silent but smiling. Then came Damian. The boy looked up at him with narrowed eyes, clearly anticipating some overbearing affection. "Do not," Damian warned. Dick kissed his forehead anyway. Too late. Damian huffed, muttering, "You're lucky I tolerate you, Richard." Dick ruffled his hair, like a reward, and moved on before the kid could bite him. He made his way to Duke next, who was placing the breadstick tray on the counter. "Master Chef," Dick said warmly, arms open. "Can I?" Duke gave a low laugh. "Yeah, okay." Dick was quick to wrap him in a warm hug, squeezing. He pressed a kiss to Duke's forehead, too, before letting go. He then turned to Steph, slowing just a bit. "You want a hug, Stephanie?" Steph hesitated a beat, then gave a quick, subtle nod. "Yeah." Dick was nothing if not good at reading the room. He could tell she was off. He approached without fanfare and wrapped her up softly, no pressure, just solid and safe. She hugged him back after a second and whispered, "Thanks. Anytime." Finally, Dick turned to the last person standing. Jason had just turned back to the oven, pulling it open and slipping the lasagna out. The golden cheese was bubbling, the edges crispy in the best way. He'd almost set it on the counter. And that's when Dick struck. He came up behind him like a sneak attack and wrapped both arms tightly around Jason's middle. "Jesus, Dick," Jason snapped, nearly dropping the entire tray. "Are you trying to get scolded?" Dick just laughed into his shoulder, undeterred. "You looked huggable." Jason scowled and set the tray down. "I'm wearing oven mitts and carrying hot lasagna. I am literally not huggable right now." Dick didn't let go. With a deep sigh, Jason turned around, giving in. He reached out and returned the hug properly, solid and brief. Then, grinning like the bastard younger brother he was, Jason leaned forward and kissed the top of Dick's head. "Still taller," he said smugly. Dick squawked. "You're the worst." Jason snorted. "Tell me something I don't know." Then he pulled apart, just as Duke clapped his hands together. "Okay, question. Is dinner now, or are we waiting for someone else to drop through the ceiling?" Jason looked around. Everyone was here. His apartment was full. He picked up the tray and set it on a trivet. "Nah, let's eat. Before someone invites Superman and we have to make a second lasagna." The group groaned and chuckled all at once. Steph snagged some plates from the cabinet, Cass helped Tim sit up, and Damian sat up straighter too, straightening his cape, like he didn't just spend 10 minutes being snuggled. Titus barked again, and Jason looked over at the spread of family gathered around his small dining table, each of them somehow fitting like puzzle pieces into a moment that felt real and warm and solid. Yeah, he thought, this was perfect. And the only notes on this one are to leave comments and kudos on the original work. Tim pulled out a packet of lasagna noodles. Some tomato. Why are the lasagna noodles in the fridge? Are they has he pre-cooked lasagna noodles? I have so many questions. Does he just keep, like, dried pasta in his fridge? Tim lingered by the counter for another moment, watching okay, so I'm going to assume that he just had pre-cooked lasagna noodles from that time estimate. Like, you would be able to make to like boil some noodles before then. But also, why did he have lasagna noodles in his fridge? I have so many questions. Do people keep, like, dried noodles in the fridge? Is this the keeping cereal in the fridge thing? Okay, this is fine.